Hi, everyone. So we're finally live. It's great to be here with Karen Strong. Karen, why don't you maybe introduce yourself for who might not know you?
Oh, well, thank you for that compliment. It was a sneaky one, but I'm Karen Strawn. I blog and I do YouTube videos on anti-feminism, men's rights, sort of branching out into other political issues and social psychology issues in some ways, I guess. That's really what I do. So.
Yeah, the biggest question that has to be asked is sort of your family, your background. What sort of family did you grow up in? How did that influence your views and the fact that, you started your YouTube channel and became a political commentator?
I was actually lucky enough to come from a family that was almost obscenely and absurdly stable and sort of calm and chill and laid back. I mean, my parents were strict, but they were not punitive. They weren't particularly punitive. And so they had high standards in terms of what they expected of their kids, but they also were not, it wasn't a shouty household. When you cross the line, it was, I'm very disappointed in you, and things like that. And they chose their battles very well. So, it was, they recognized that their daughters, because I have two sisters, were individuals with their own individual personalities. And so, my oldest sister was always very, very diligent in school. And I was that kid that skipped half their classes in high school. And my mom was, she would just essentially say, she would say to the principal when he'd call and say, she's missing so many classes and this is not okay and I'm going to suspend her. And my mom would tell him, okay, what are her marks like? Oh, yeah, they're fine. Okay, is she disruptive when she's there? Oh, she's not. Is she keeping up with the rest of the class, or is she holding everybody back? Oh, well, it's all good. What good is suspending her going to do other than make her miss more classes, right? So come to me when you have an actual solution. Until then, I'm perfectly fine with her not attending class. If she's bored out of her mind in school, right, then I don't care. So essentially, I mean, they were just they were supportive where they had to be. They were, strict where they had to be. They made allowances where they felt it was okay to do so. And they were, my parents were the most amazing team. Like, watching them was like watching a couples dancing, right? In, competitive dance, ballroom dancing. That, a pair that have been together for years and years and years, and they can just sort of move as one. And that was sort of how the whole house ran. And they, one of the most sort of, one of the things, the rituals that brings back the feelings of nostalgia is the Friday night after dinner. The two of them would sit in the living room, and while the rest of us were, watching TV or reading a book or whatever, and they would go through the week's receipts and balance their checkbook, right? And or having the financial advisor who was managing their sort of retirement investment portfolio come over one evening every 3-4 months, and they would sit around the kitchen table and they would discuss all of the stuff, right? And so I looked at that. I grew up with my parents acting as like this well-oiled machine and this perfect team. It was just absolutely, and just, it's not that they didn't have disagreements, but there was never any disrespect within those disagreements for each other. And then sort of when I grew up, the more people I met, the more fortunate I felt to have had the family that I did, because you meet people all the time and their parents are, toxic. They have issues. They have issues with alcoholism. They have issues with being abusive or anger management. They have issues with not being accepting of uniqueness in their children or difference in their children and all of those things, right? And so I just kind of it's made me feel really grateful. And it's actually, when I look back on my childhood, I'm just like, holy shit, did I ever luck out, right? And but part of that, what happened, you know, how I was raised really does inform me in terms of what I think things between men and women should be like, right? And what I think they're capable of being, which is, you know, you are fellow travelers in the universe, you know, you are living your lives, not separate, but together. Your interests are mostly shared with each other, not competing, and all of these things, right? So that sort of, when feminism became more and more apparent to me through media and my greater interest in sort of the bigger world around me as I was growing up, when I was like a teenager, I was like, what are these women even, like, what universe are they living in? Right. And what universe are they trying to bring about? This is just really, it just struck me as so wrongheaded. And then as I got older and started to realize how much that had seeped into not just sort of this cultural discourse, but legislation and policy and all of these things, aspects of, you know, institutions in our society that actually have real impact and control over how people can live their lives. I was just like, what are we doing? This is like, this can't end well. So that was, you know, essentially, I've never been a feminist. I always thought they were a bunch of kooks. But over time, I've just become more and more and more anti-feminist. So, yeah.
Yeah, so continuing that family aspect, I wanted to ask if you have any suggestions for how our society, how parents can raise our sons, you know, with an emotional stability, with love, but also maintaining in them those positive masculine traits like being able to provide and protect, which today are so undermined by feminism.
I would say that essentially you raise your sons with honesty. So you don't lie to them about the fact that, you know, they're going to be treated differently because they're boys, because they're going to be treated differently. So if a girl hits a boy on the school ground and he hits her back, he's likely to be the one who gets in more trouble. And that's just how it is. And yes, it's not fair, but that's just how it is. And you have to do that in order to prepare them for the world that they're going to live in. You don't want to lie to your kids and say, you know, everything's equal. You're going to be treated just as good in these ways as girls are. That's just not the case. And if you do that, I think, if you actually do that, and, you know, for a while, boys can have children's privilege, I guess you could call it, right? So the sort of greater compassion that we feel for children than we do for adults and things like that, because they are indeed children. But once they hit that second flood of testosterone at puberty and start presenting more as men or as adult males, a lot of that compassion just vanishes, right? So, you know, there is something to be said for raising tough kids, like for raising kids who, I often describe it like this: when your kid bonks his head, don't do anything, right? Don't do anything, don't notice it, and wait until he decides how he feels about it, right? And because a lot of parents do this thing where, you know, their kid falls off the swing or whatever, and they're like, oh no, are you okay? And then the kid's like, I don't know, am I okay? I don't know if I'm okay, right? And then they start freaking out, and it's this big emotional thing. Whereas a lot of kids, when they fall off the swing, if they look at you and they see you going, no big deal, right? They're like, oh, yeah, kind of no big deal. Brush myself off and get on with playing, right? So, and I think that, you know, what we've been doing, at least for the last 2 to 3 generations, is really trying to protect our children from everything. It's like we almost want them to wear a helmet through the entirety of their lives, just in case. And we don't allow them to build up any calluses. We never tell them that their feelings are inappropriate, or their expression of feelings at a given time is inappropriate. I remember when I was a kid, we didn't go out to restaurants much because my parents were very responsible with money. But when we did, we were expected to behave. And if we started to misbehave, we would go out and sit in the car while everybody else finished their dinner. And they would pack up our dinner and bring it home. And we could eat, you'd eat it when you got home. If you were really bad, they didn't pack up your dinner and bring it home. You had a bologna sandwich when you got home. So, and it's that sort of setting of boundaries, and your feelings are not the center of the universe. I think that a lot of kids are really missing out on. And ironically, that's one of the things that fathers bring to the table in a lot of cases, right? Women tend to set more boundaries, but not really enforce them with their children as much. They kind of, they make all these rules and then they let the kids break them all the time. And men tend to set many fewer boundaries, but they stomp down on those boundaries whenever they're violated. And this is generally speaking, not across the board, but generally speaking, this is how it works. And how kids learn compassion, how kids learn a sense of themselves as not the center of the universe, but you know, as a member of a society where others are equally human and equally deserving of consideration. That doesn't come from a bottomless well of compassion from the parent. It actually comes from the setting of boundaries by parents and the enforcement of those boundaries. And so it really does seem like, you know, in the broader general sense, men and women, the way they approach their children provides a real balance between that sort of the compassion and the more distanced set of expectations and enforced expectations that fathers tend to bring to the table. So, yeah, I think honestly, you have to raise your kids with some calluses. You do, and you can't indulge their every negative emotion. Because that just validates every negative emotion that they have. And sometimes they are overreacting. Sometimes they are making your kid's having a tantrum because you didn't buy them gum, right? And, you know, having a complete meltdown, that is not appropriate, and it's not rational, and it should not be tolerated. The child should be put somewhere where nobody has to deal with that. You know, you are entitled, you have every right to yell and scream and stomp and whatever. You're going to go somewhere where I don't have to hear that, because I have every right to not listen to you do that. And that's really my approach with my kids. That was my parents' approach with us. And like I said, they were not punitive. It was not, I'm going to lock you in your room because I'm mad at you. Or put you in your room. It's like, I'm going to put you in your room because you are imposing on other people around you, and nobody, you know, have some consideration for the people around you. So, you know, and we have the right to not have you shove your emotional state on everybody else, right? We also have the right, and, you know, to feel how we feel. So I think that's a big, huge way that my parents approach things that made me able to, I guess, do what I do. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that structure in life for a young kid is so important. You know, at this time you go to bed, at this time you do that. When you misbehave, you're punished, so that you know how to function in society. And these no stress parents just harm their children. I absolutely agree with that. So in what you were saying, you talk a lot about the role of the father and how important it is to have a father figure, with which I absolutely agree. So what would you say to all those feminists who go around saying that single mothers are so much better than, you know, a proper family with a mother and a father?
Oh, well, they're just wrong. I mean, the statistical evidence shows that they're wrong. You know, and you can't completely divorce the statistical evidence, or you can't completely divorce the situation in the home, the environment, from heredity. You know, a lot of our personalities and stuff are heritable. I mean, I was just reading a study that said, you know, children who are spanked at age, you know, 3 are more likely to have behavioral problems at age 8. Well, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, so is it caused by the spanking? Or is the fact that the kids who are spanked the ones that already have behavioral problems at age 2 or 3, right? And therefore they tend to, because everybody who's had more than one kid, they know that every one of their kids is going to have a different temperament, and they're going to require a slightly different approach when it comes to parenting. You know, and there are kids out there who, you know, you can just, a timeout is, you know, a 30-second timeout is sufficient to stop a behavior. That was not my daughter. My daughter she had issues. The psychologists couldn't even figure out what her issues were. They were like, oh, she seems severely autistic, except for these 4 major contraindications, right? That would rule that out. So we don't know what's wrong with your daughter. We don't know why she's not talking. We don't know why she doesn't have language yet. We don't understand. We don't know why she seems to have extremely low pain threshold, or, you know, absolutely no fear. No fear of heights, no fear of spiders, no fear of snakes, no fear of, you know, rodents, no fear of anything. You know, heavy machinery, anything. And so that kid, there is no way, because she was completely incommunicative in terms of verbal stuff, right? There was no way to deal with that kid by reasoning with her. If you put her in a timeout somewhere, she would just, I don't know, break out and climb up on the counter and get at the knives in the knife rack. Like, you couldn't turn your back on her for a second or let go of her hand in public. I mean, like, there were things with her that, and she's much different now. But there were things with her where I had to change my approach from a typical approach with a parent and a child. And my son, my oldest, if you swatted his bottom, he'd stop doing what he was doing. He wouldn't even cry because it didn't hurt. It was just like the warning, right? Swat his bottom. But if you put him in a timeout, he'd still be hyperventilating from crying an hour later, right? That's how much he had the separation anxiety, right? That's how big his separation anxiety was. To be put in a room, even with the door open, away from people for even 30 seconds would set him into such an emotional state that it, like, that was like that was like the worst freaking thing I could do. But a swat on the seat of the pants didn't even faze him, other than to get him to stop doing what he was doing. So, I mean, like, you have to look at your kids' personalities. You have to look at how things go. But in terms of the father involvement and the mother involvement, one of the things that they have found also is that your child's emotional well-being is not predicted by how much one-on-one, I guess they call quality time, either parent spends with the kid. It's more strongly predicted by the child being able to observe mom and dad engaged in a cooperative, functional relationship.